Welcome to Absolute Comics with Benny and Sal. Today you're finding this because we wanted to put something up on the official YouTube channel as a response to what actually happened to the weekly poll. We realized that while I've tweeted about it and discussed it, and Sal's tweeted about it and discussed it, and Rob made a video on it, and I don't know if Joel did anything.
I doubt
we
it.
never, we didn't actually say, like, there was no, like, this is what happened official video in the home of the weekly poll. As a matter of fact, my tweet wasn't even on the weekly poll's Twitter. It was on my Twitter. So we didn't have like an official response. So we thought we would do a special episode of Absolute Comics right now with me and Sal, where we kind of discuss what happened over the life of the weekly poll and what happened to it in the end. And for those of you guys who are watching this live, because we do film this live at twitch.tv/comicstorian at about 5 p.m. Eastern every Thursday. Not Thursday. Whoa. That's my other show. Every Tuesday. Sal, do you want to start? How did the weekly poll start? Let's go from there.
Oh, wow. That's taking us back. But all right. The weekly poll started. It was brought together by a group of remarkable people who could make the videos that one individual group couldn't do. It's literally the Avengers of the comic book YouTube's landscape. You guys reached out to me. I know that Rob and you reached out to each other kind of separately. I came in as the late edition. It was you guys who formed the weekly poll together with somebody else. And then I was brought in as we need another perspective. I'm happy to do it. I was very hungry at the time. I'm still hungry now. It is dinner time, so. But no, I was happy to do it. And then we literally just hit the ground running. Started doing that show on a weekly basis for 4 or 5 years. It felt like it.
We went 3 years. So this is going to give you all the weird intricacies of what happened with the weekly poll, just so that the full story's out there, so people understand
the official story.
Yeah, Rob reached out to me, which is why he has credit for being the owner of the weekly poll, which is why when we restarted this, we didn't want to do it without him. He reached out to me, and then we started with Dave. It was a fan of Rob's as the other member, and then we brought in Sal, and then we kind of developed into Benny, Rob, and Sal. That became the show.
Yes.
As time went on, we never knew what to do with the weekly poll because Rob's original vision was 3 friends get together and chat about comics, which is what we did for 5 years. We got together, chatted about comics in general or the news or whatever. And it was fun. We all had a great time with it. No one ever, I don't think anyone hated it.
No. We had guests who hated it. And we had people who we were courting to get on the show who also were probably not big fans of it. But it wasn't no one who was a regular on the show was there against their own will. There was nobody who was ugh, I got to do this contractually obligated series. We all were friends in real life. We're all still real friends in real life. We still talk to each other. And we had been on and off camera. The idea was just let's do the show in front of an audience. And we took that. We took that idea and ran with it. We made multiple shows, not only online, on stream and on recorded, but we also did live shows where we would go places and perform the weekly poll, so to speak.
Right. And so what ended up happening, though, was this is before I would say I kind of took my channel and stuff more into the business perspective. And we made this entire podcast network that has advertisers and sponsors and stuff like that. This was the early days of the weekly poll. We didn't really know what to do with it. We had become popular. We were winning awards on Bleeding Cool and stuff like that. And we were we're popular and we don't know what to do with it. And the only thing we ever did with it was we used it to promote our individual YouTube channels. Yes. And we took live shows. We would go to Comic Cons, we would perform the show live, and then we'd go back home. We never did anything beyond that. We never gained any sponsors, advertising, or anything like that because the overall philosophy was that it was supposed to be a bunch of friends getting together, which meant this is something that Sal and I disagreed with, but we kind of let Rob take the lead on this. There was almost no prep to the episodes. The topics were almost researched 10 minutes prior. It was a lot of times, did you not know about this, Sal? Read this real quick. That kind of a thing. Which wasn't bad. Obviously, we made a good show for 5 years doing that. I'm not saying that the method had any problems at all. But that also created a problem where it was hard to sell space on it. We didn't know how to sell space on it. We didn't know how to monetize it. And as the years went on, it became very much, we're all showing up. We've gotten about as much reach out of it as we can. Do we need to keep doing this because we all have become so preoccupied with our own stuff? As time went on, I was doing
that. Did this make us if we stopped doing the show, would we stop being friends, or would the audience be unhappy about that? And we really wanted to do our best to kind of give the audience something that was like not only our most honest, pure selves, but also something that they would want to watch. And it became
that
apparent,
was a big thing.
Very like long into the show. Yeah, it was a good thing. It became clear that the Weekly Pull didn't have the direction that it needed in order to keep going, to keep being sustainable, and also to keep being a thing people would want to watch. And so we're like,
because we didn't know, should we go towards news? Should we be more comics? Like at the point that we had come to the realization that we had something people wanted to watch, but didn't have a plan for it, it was like 3 years in. Like
yeah, right. There was no plan, there was no rudder, there was no like map, and then you're 3 years deep, and you're like, oh right, we probably should have come up with something. And then when we tried to, it was kind of like, well, we all have very different ideas about where it should go, if it should go anywhere at all, because within 3 years, 3 to 5 different YouTube channels, all kind of having their own directions, audiences, and ideas about what to do with a brand, it became complicated.
It did. Well, and that's just it, because as I think one thing that made the Weekly Pull, and what we're hoping to make with Absolute Comics, one of the best elements of it is we aren't the same channel. We don't have the same opinions, and this has always been the true with the Weekly Pull members. It was very different takes on presenting the content. It was very different takes on opinions. It was very different. The overall, we had different audiences that we were bringing together, but you're right. I'm very much of the old school military mindset. We show up at a certain time. We do the job appropriately. We move on. Rob is very much like, I don't really want to have a time or schedule. I just want to show up and do my thing. And we're just going to BS about whatever. And Sal, I always felt like you kind of fell in the middle of that. Like you have a schedule, you do your things on time, but you also like to relax and kind of chill out. And that's where, and we each had our own takes on what we should do with it.
Yes, absolutely.
And what ended up happening was about 3 years in, the decision came down to like, well, okay, let's try and monetize this, because we've gotten to the point where we've gotten as much promotion across our channels as we can get. So why don't we take this popular product and try to make money with it? Like as in getting advertisers and stuff.
Yeah. And you were really instrumental in getting that ball rolling. I know that like certainly when we were working on it, we were developing that plan, you were like, hey, we've got, like, just myself, I've got these sponsors and these brands lined up. I could put that into this pot instead of my own, and we could share the wealth, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And because my philosophy was, if the group itself started to feel like the promotion aspect was gone, and we were getting, even myself, all of us kind of got to that lazy mindset of like, well, it's the Weekly Pull time again. What are we talking about? Let me look at the Skype chat real fast. Okay, that, and that. I know half of those. You know, like that. I don't know about you, Sal, but I definitely fell into that same rut as everyone else. And part of that was there was no motivation to actually do it. There was we weren't getting promotion. We weren't growing any new audiences at all at this point. We weren't monetized, so there was no ad revenue. There was no check attached to it. It was like, it became a thing of, do I want to show up, or should I work on my own projects? Should I go work on my videos and my stuff, or should I show up and chat with the guys and do whatever on a shoddy Skype connection with no real production quality? And it didn't look good. And so I decided, let's get advertisers. And I reached out, and the initial reaction we got from the first company was they didn't like that we were multiple channels with multiple avenues of promotion. And their reaction was, you need to consolidate. And the biggest one that they had brought up was the fact that Sal had a Patreon, but I think did Rob and I have ours at the time? We may have.
I think at the very least you had a Patreon, and I think Rob was either developing it or it was right before he launched it. Or he had just launched it, but it was right. There definitely was intent. Like there were 3 Patreons. Yeah.
And they were like, you need to consolidate down to the best of your ability. So that would mean a consolidated Twitter, a consolidated social. A lot of it would have been easy to do. The big one was, though, the Patreons. They didn't want us to have multiple Patreons to confuse the audience. They wanted us to consolidate to a Weekly Pull Patreon. And I never, and as I've told that part of the story before, and I've never given you any bad decision, because it really fell in Sal's lap. He was the one that depended upon his Patreon. So the big decision was, if it didn't work out, Sal was going to take a hit. And it was like, do you want to risk that? It was entirely in Sal's court.
Right, and that was when I was kind of like, I can't give up this aspect of it. We've as our channel has been growing, it's been growing for 5 years, and it's like, at a snail's pace, and I'm like, ad revenue's doing okay, but the Patreon's like the new money, and it's doing really well, and we really
this was also around, I think, one of the adpocalypses. So like our individual channels were taking a hit, Rob and I were able to do fine because one, I didn't have as big a team as I do now, and with our channels are so large that a hit, it still sucks horribly, but I could at least pay my mortgage.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing is that like we in this kind of world, you don't really know where the money's coming from, or at the very least, like you don't know, you can't rely on all those revenue streams, so you have to create as many as you can. And Patreon was a relatively new at that time potential revenue stream, and especially with the adpocalypse and with the the shaky nature of the Weekly Pull, and just knowing how business works and working with multiple partners, like you never know whether it's going to work out or not. And so when you're thinking about that, it's like, okay, I need you to take your Patreon and fold it into ours, and you won't have one. And if it doesn't work out within a year, you'll have to start from scratch all over again. And I'm like, I'm a little bit risk averse, so it was hard for me to do that. Yeah.
Well, so what ended up happening was the decision was at that time to move the Weekly Pull to an every other week schedule, and just turn it into a permanent buds hanging out, chatting with you guys kind of a thing. And I think, honestly, in my opinion, that was the beginning of the end for the Weekly Pull.
Definitely.
Because what happened was I went off and took the advertiser deal, and we created our own series of podcasts, which anybody watching this channel on a regular basis knows has become an entirely fundamental part of my business plan at this point. We have multiple shows: Comics Experiment, the best damn comic book review show in the entire world, featured on... Dan, what is the name of it? What...
Well, it changes very frequently, but I believe this week it was the best comic book review show you have ever seen that is sometimes recorded at the same time as other comic book podcasts, but we are still really cool and pretty much the best one, so you should watch us.
We also do our Conspiracy Cast, where Dan, Andy, and Gary sit down and they talk about various conspiracies. We do our 3 Beers at a Topic, where it's more of a general discussion show over beer, and we do all of those. And now we're also doing Absolute Comics. So what I ended up creating was basically a podcast network with its own staff, its own studio, its own stuff. Out of that, and so what you see now came out of that decision from the Weekly Pull, because if Sal hadn't decided to go the direction he did, I probably wouldn't have done half of what we ended up doing. It would have just been the Weekly Pull. Yeah. Which, so what ended up happening was the Weekly Pull showed up every other week, and that's when the guests started to get spotty. Me and Sal tried to show up as much as we could, but the overall decision was, if any of the one guests couldn't make it, we just go on with who's available. And I think there was a period of 2 months where it was just you, Tiffany, and Joel. Then there was I showed up a whole bunch and tried my best. Then there was Rob was showing up during this period, but as time went on, his focus completely shifted away. Anybody watching his channel knows this. He wants to focus on his vlog channels and his life advice stuff. He wants to work on everything that's not Comics Explained. He wants Comics Explained to kind of be where it's at and not do anything else with it except keep it going. So because of that, Rob would get more and more sporadic overall as time went on. And then we started skipping more and more episodes because is Rob going to show? We don't know. At this point, is even the show anymore? What are we
that's
doing?
The thing. You didn't know when you were working on this show and you didn't have any financial benefit or even growth from the show, and you have all this time that you're dedicating towards your own personal projects. You're kind of I really have to compartmentalize and go how much time do I have to dedicate to this? And with Rob, it was he was getting new equipment. He was working on all these different things. He had a lot of things that he wanted to focus his attention on. And the Weekly Pull just, and for all of us, the Weekly Pull just wasn't on the highest list of priorities for everybody because of the new and exciting projects that everyone was working on, not just Rob, but you and I.
I was building my podcast stuff. You were, I think, at the time moving into your current studio, so you were
we were moving
everything. Yeah, you were moving.
Exactly.
Rob's on a whole focus on his other things. And that's kind of the direction that it got more and more sporadic. It got more and more problematic to schedule. And it really just turned into, the whole cast just had no real motivation to do it, I would say is the best way, because there was no ultimate goal. We had no direction. We had no monetization options. We hadn't applied for a live show in almost a year and a half at the time. So that was, I would say that was probably the ultimate crust of what of what we were doing. Was the live shows were the most fun, and we hadn't even done any of those because we couldn't get Rob to show up. And and so we didn't even know this, but the last episode turned out to be the Endgame episode.
Yeah, which is not a bad end.
Yeah. And we couldn't get Rob to show up again. And Sal and I had come to the decision that if Rob wasn't there, we weren't going to do it. This is before we had decided to do our own project. We were like, if Rob's not there, it's not the weekly poll. So if he just keeps saying he's not going to show up, or he's not even reaching out or not responding. And this is during Rob, like he had just met with Mariah and things like that. So he had a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Exactly.
And so we just kind of let it hover until the last live show, which was the Denver Comic-Con. And it had gotten to the point where it didn't even feel like the same show anymore. And Rob's focus had been so away from everything that we're doing. He was barely even there during that period. Like, we all had tables. He wasn't at his table. We couldn't get a hold of him. He was just wandered off doing his own thing. The show came up. No one could find him. And then we just found him down there. Like, and at this point, we had flown Sal out to do the show. And I had a great time. And Sal had a great time. And Rob he obviously did not want to do it anymore. Like, and you guys, as you know now, if you've been following, Rob made a whole video explaining his rationale behind it. So this isn't like news that no one knows. So it's kind of whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, no, this isn't. I'm not giving away trade secrets. Rob made a whole video explaining that he didn't feel challenged.
That's true. He has a whole video.
He was shifting focus. Yeah. So at that point, Sal and I decided we don't get a feeling that Rob wants to do this. And at the time, the decision was, well, Rob's going to double back around to comic books. We've known him for 5 years. This is what he does. And when he does, we'll do the weekly poll. And as time went on, both Sal and I started to miss doing this on a weekly basis and having a consistent chat. Like, I think I didn't even talk to you at all during July. It was like, hey, Sal, how you been? Cool.
Exactly. No, that was how the conversations usually go.
Right. And so it was kind of like, at that point, Sal and I were like, we miss doing this, but Rob doesn't want to do this.
Well, and also, oh, go ahead.
No, you got it.
Well, I was just going to say, like, not only did we still want to make a show, but you out there still wanted to watch one. And
yeah,
like,
we got
it was
a lot
interesting
of responses.
How, like, Endgame came out forever ago, and ever since and after Endgame, people are like, when are you guys going to make something else, or when are you going to keep doing the old show? And it was like, there's clearly an audience for this. And so, you know.
I think that's one thing, and I'll admit, that none of us really considered. That the audience wanted the weekly poll, because I think all of us looked at it as, we have our audiences. I have Comic Historian, you have Comic Pop, Rob has Comics Explained, and we have our individual audiences. And so I think we always considered the weekly polls audience just our individual audiences showing up
all at the same time.
Right, but there was I don't think any of us considered it the weekly polls audience. I think we considered it our audiences. Yeah.
It's just like the Venn diagrams of our channels, and the intersection is who shows up. And but no, there actually was an audience, and it's you who's watching it now, who's watching the videos, who's subscribed, and so it was like there's no reason to deny you that, and also there's no reason to not make a show, since we do that, like doing it, like each other, and enjoy producing. So it's like, why wouldn't we?
Well, and that's what happened with me and Sal talking about it. Around August, we realized, due to the demand, everyone, where's the weekly poll? Where's the weekly poll? Because when we were sporadic, you guys didn't say very much. When we did make one, then you heard from you.
Right. Well, and it also made it made the most sense for us and for you to not try to make some kind of like gross marionette puppet of the weekly poll, where it's like so that not only did people who love that show get disappointed by being like, this is clearly not the show. We also didn't want, as you said before, and I think you've reiterated this a couple times, it's like, without Rob, it ain't the weekly poll.
No, and that's, I still stand by the philosophy. And that's why eventually in August, Sal and I were like, let's make something new. Like the initial name was Absolute Comics, and then I jokingly called it, it's not the weekly poll, it's Absolute Comics. And I was like, let's do that. That's the name right there.
Right, yeah.
And for two reasons. One, without Rob, it's not the weekly poll, and we can't get Rob to show up on a consistent basis because of his process of what he's doing. I mean, that's fine. That's what he wants to do, and that's just the nature of doing a show for 5 years. People move on to other projects, and that's exactly what Rob has done. And so what we decided to do was make Absolute Comics, and then since Sal and I wanted to get more of a structured environment, more of a structured show, get more, like, we always wanted to go in this direction. And then since I've already got my relationships with our podcast company, it was like, Sal, let me take Absolute Comics as like an official Benny Podcast Network show. So now when I get advertisers, it's just in the wheelhouse. It's not, this is a separate show, I need separate contracts. It's, you signed up for the Comic Story and Podcast brand, here's one of my shows.
Exactly.
And so, and then it was a decision of, well, do we invite Joel back and Tiffany back as a regular? Do we make, the decision against that was really the two most, and this isn't a stab at all against Tiffany or Joel. Tiffany has a full-time job. Joel always just kind of showed up for the ride. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but he just kind of showed up and had fun with the conversations. And so that was the decision of, if we're making a new show, it can't be the Weekly Pull without Rob. Because that's exactly what it would have been with Tiffany, Joel, me, and Sal. It would have just been the Weekly Pull without Rob. And so we were like, it has to feel completely different. So why don't you and I be the hosts of this show? Why don't we make this show, and then we can handpick who we want to be additional guests on the show for particular topics. But we've also discovered doing a 2-person show is so much easier to manage. Like before the show. Go ahead.
You're only coordinating 2 schedules. You only have to worry about hearing the other person. You don't have to worry about like trying to manage so many other voices and opinions and internet connections and all that stuff. Like it's so much just streamlined in general.
Like before the show, I just hit up Sal. I'm like, hey, what do you want to talk about today? And we just have a back and forth chat real quick about what we want to do, as opposed to going, all right, I'm going to pre-call all 4 people 30 minutes prior so we can talk before we go pre-show it.
And that was also a logistical nightmare because you call people and like some people wouldn't pick up, or they wouldn't be home, or they'd have to get home, or they left early and you didn't like know how to reach them, and so everybody'd be hanging out. Like you'd have 3 people waiting for one other person. And it, by the way, not singling anybody out. Literally, it was everyone was guilty of this at some point or another, myself especially. Yeah. And so it was like, oh well, who's going to be available, and do we even know who's going to be happening? And then we'd be like, okay, well, I guess we'll delay the show by half an hour. Like, no 2 people, 2.
Right. And so what Sal and I do now is actually at 4 p.m. Eastern, we meet up, do all the logistics, fix all the stuff behind. I got Dan monitoring everything. Say hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
I knew you were going to dad joke it. We got Gary there monitoring all the camera stuff like that. When this gets done now, it gets sent over to Dylan, who puts together the entire project. So it's all one big thing for whatever. And then we upload it to all of our sources. It's just a streamlined process, works better. We both know the exact time to be here. We both know when we're going to call. Everything's great. So that is what happened to the Weekly Poll. There was no bad blood. There was no issues. There was no problems. Yes, I've made snide comments at Rob based on stuff he did during all of that. But most of that had nothing to do with the Weekly Poll. And I've said this to him before, the biggest issue I ever had with Rob during RNBE and during the Weekly Poll was he just didn't communicate how he was feeling and what he wanted to do. So me just focusing down, I'm moving in one direction, and I'm assuming he's going to be there, and he's not. But even now, I chatted with Rob yesterday. Like, everyone is perfectly fine, and we're all working on our new projects, and we're all having a great time. And I was told, because he plays Destiny with my Destiny community, that he is happy for us and good to go. So,
great.
So that is what eventually happened with the Weekly Poll. Just people moving in different directions, having new projects, and that was it. That's all it was. There was no top secret bad blood, or some weird thing said. Nothing.
No. So hopefully now that like that chapter is closed, this new one called Absolute Comics that you're here enjoying right now is something you enjoy. That's what we hope. That's like the most we can hope for, is that you appreciated and you enjoyed what was, and you stick around for what's next, because what we have next is pretty cool and exciting. Like, we shot a lot of stuff over at New York Comic Con. We got a lot of plans for the future, and I think you're going to be really excited for what comes next. So hopefully you'll stick around.
Heck, even that was easier. We got into some interviews, and it was just like, here's the host. Like,
right.
It's not like, all right, which one of you 5 of you want to do this?
oh yeah, no, that would have been. Can you imagine 5? Like, because we all 5 would have been there, and then we've been like, okay, so who gets to do this interview? Because there's no way we're gonna get. And the reality is, the people who would have done every interview is the biggest ones, because if we had worked out something with a brand or with a sponsor or with a company to make those interviews happen, they would not have wanted like the smallest tier channels to talk to those people, even though they were part of the same brand they made the deal with. So, you see what I mean? Like, see how that works? It's just, it's really complicated, and it's a logistical nightmare. And ultimately, like, the Avengers works, but like, they don't get health insurance through that company. Like, they all have to go find out their own way to do it. So yeah, you know.
So that's it. That's for this is the last time I think Sal and I are going to fully explain it. The purpose was to put it up on the Weekly Pull channel, since we are now actually using the Weekly Pull channel again for Absolute
Yeah, thanks
Comics.
for sticking around.
Yeah, so if you were watching this and wondered what the heck happened, that's the story. In my opinion, this is in an official TWP location. There should be no more questions.
Right? No, and I'm sure this will be enough. I mean, you have, and not only that, you got this, and you got the supplemental Rob video that came out months ago where he gave his 2 cents on the topic.
So,
and it's
which I think
pretty
helps
similar.
kill a lot of the "Where's Rob" comments. But either way. All right.
Oh, definitely.
I hope you guys enjoyed this. Don't forget to find Sal over at Comic Pop. I'm Comic Storian. This is Absolute Comics. And we will see you on the next video, which is going to be recorded immediately after this. So you can just watch us live at twitch.tv/ComicStorian. No, wait, what? Where are we?
It's Comic Storian.
Twitch.tv/ComicStorian. I have too many goddamn brands. All right. Thanks, guys.